Hi, I'm Robert Kajiwara, indigenous Ryukyuan, also known as Uchinanchu or Okinawan, president of the Peace For Okinawa Coalition based in Okinawa City. I've spoken at the U.S. Congress, the National Diet of Japan, Okinawa Prefectural Government, Yale University, University of the Ryukyus, the Southwest Conference on Asian Studies, and numerous other venues. In 2018, I petitioned to stop the illegal construction of the U.S. military base at Henoko, Okinawa, receiving over 212,000 signatures. Since 2019, I have represented Ryukyuans at the United Nations. I have a BA in History from University of Hawaii at Manoa, MA in History from University of Nebraska at Kearney, and Ph.D. A.B.D. in History from Manchester Metropolitan University. This presentation is for the University of Hawaii at Manoa's Asian Studies 600C Approaches to China course. The title of my presentation today is Ryukyuan with Chinese Characteristics, Understanding China-Okinawa Relations. This presentation is multidisciplinary, utilizing indigenous, historical, and cultural studies as well as international affairs. I received some comments last time saying that my work is too advanced and that some people don't know enough about Okinawa to understand what I'm talking about. This is a graduate course, so a basic foundational understanding of both China and Okinawa studies is necessary and expected. This isn't a high school course. At the graduate level, people are, of course, expected to provide original research. So when indigenous peoples dilute or dumb down our research, it actually hurts us, because then the scholars and leading experts in the field say, well, your work is not high quality enough. It's not detailed or in-depth enough. And this in turn is used as an excuse to keep indigenous peoples, including Ryukyuans, out of academia and out of positions of influence. This, of course, is racial discrimination. Ryukyuans are recognized by the United Nations as the indigenous peoples of the Ryukyu Islands, with our rights guaranteed by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Discrimination against Ryukyuans is a human rights violation. It is illegal under international law. Now, without further ado, let's focus on our main presentation today, which is China-Ryukyu relations. Since time immemorial, Okinawa was an independent nation known as Ryukyu in the native language. It's known as Locho in Chinese Mandarin and as Ryukyu in Japanese. Throughout that time, Ryukyuans developed our own unique history, culture, languages, values, and identity. Ryukyu is conveniently located in between numerous other regions. Naha, the largest city in Ryukyu, is closer to Seoul, Pyongyang, Manila, and many major Chinese cities than it is to Tokyo. Due to this convenient geographical proximity, Ryukyuans have often conducted a large amount of trade and cross-cultural exchange. My focus for this study is to highlight the voices of indigenous Ryukyuans. And because history plays a large part in this study, I will be utilizing a lot of the historic Ryukyuan and Chinese records in their original languages. It is well known around the world that Okinawans strongly oppose the US and Japanese military presence. For decades, Okinawans have held daily peace demonstrations. The US and Japan frequently claim that this military presence is necessary in order to contain China and to protect Okinawans. However, even the US government has privately admitted that Okinawans have a anti-US, pro-China bent. We know this via WikiLeaks, and it was later published in the Wall Street Journal. So an examination of China-Ryukyu relations helps explain why Ryukyuans have a favorable view of China. Prior to the Ming Dynasty, China and Ryukyu had informal relations mostly limited to trade and cross-cultural exchange. A lot of interesting things could be said about this early period of China-Ryukyu relations. However, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over most of that today and instead provide a quick summary. I do talk more in depth about this time period in previous presentations, which you can find online. A number of Chinese emperors prior to the Ming were fascinated with Ryukyu and believed it held the legendary elixir of immortality. So they sent out search parties, none of which arrived in Ryukyu, and many of whom arrived in Japan to the north. In some cases, the Chinese and Japanese did have violent encounters. The Ryukyuan historic texts claim that the Mongols during the Yuan dynasty attempted twice to invade Luchu. However, Luchuans considered this to be an act of aggression on the part of the Mongols rather than the Chinese. I should point out that a number of scholars today do not think the Mongols ever did attempt to invade Luchu, but that they instead tried to invade Taiwan. In 1372, the Ming court dispatched a delegation to Luchu, and shortly after, Luchuans responded by sending their own delegation to the Ming capital at Nanjing. There, Luchuans formally submitted a request to become a tribute state of China. In doing so, Luchu became China's first formal tribute state, followed shortly after by Korea and numerous Southeast Asian polities. Although China had a number of tribute states over its long history, only Luchu and Korea remained consistent with the relationship well into the 19th century. Tribute state is the conventional and widely used term in the English language to describe the China-Luchu relationship between 1372 and 1879. This term is problematic, however, because it is not well understood today. In both a Western and Imperial Japanese sense, the term tribute state implies forced submission, subjugation, oppression, and colonialism. Many Western and Japanese scholars, government officials, and media today present a skewed view of the China-Luchu relationship, claiming that China forced themselves onto Luchu or dominated Luchu, similar to how the US and Japan are doing. Even the Encyclopedia Britannica, in its Ryukyu Islands entry, claims that Chinese and Japanese sovereignty were successively forced onto Ryukyu. But as we can see from the historical evidence, this was not even close to being true. I suggest that the relationship between China and Luchu could perhaps more accurately be termed a sovereign tribute state or a special relationship, since under their agreement both sides maintain their own respective sovereignty. In fact, Luchu's sovereignty was recognized, guaranteed, and protected by China. This historic China-Luchu relationship is so important that even to this day it is celebrated by Luchuans. Every year we have the Shooti Castle Festival, which includes a massive reenactment of the arrival of a Chinese embassy to Luchu. This is a huge event that includes thousands of participants and spectators. Shooti Castle tragically burnt down in October 2019, and shortly after was the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the celebrations have been put on hold for now, but they will surely start up again soon. China also commemorates this historic relationship and faithfully maintains the old Luchuan embassy, as well as other historic Luchuan sites within China. The relationship can be described as like parent and child, like older sibling and younger sibling, or as the US historian George Kerr wrote, like teacher and student. It was consensual and mutually beneficial. Luchu was actually the driving force in maintaining this relationship because it was extremely lucrative for them. Over the course of around 500 years, Luchu sent at least 347 formal tribute missions to China. On average, Luchuans sent around one delegation every 2 years, which was by far the most of any of China's tribute states. These tribute missions were very well documented in the official court records from both China and Luchu. Luchuans would provide numerous gifts as tribute to China, and in return, China would provide many gifts to Luchu. China always gave more to Luchu than what they received in order to demonstrate China's immense wealth and generosity. This was naturally expected given that China was considered the greater country. Luchuans were extremely happy with this arrangement and sought to pay tribute to China as often as possible. At one point, China's treasuries even began to become depleted, causing China to politely request that Luchu and the other tribute states pay tribute less often. However, this request was not enforced, and Luchuans managed to convince China to continue allowing them to pay their regular tribute, which was on average once every 2 years. Luchu often gave China some of its own native products, such as shells and other ocean products, agriculture, horses, sulfur, and textiles, and in return, China would give Luchu porcelain, silk, and numerous other luxury items. Luchu would also then retrade some of these items to other nations such as Korea, Japan, or Southeast Asian city-states. And in doing so, Lu Chu became the chief facilitator of a major maritime trade network in East and Southeast Asia. This trade network was lucrative for all sides, and especially for Lu Chu. The China-Lu Chu relationship was important for both sides, not only due to the trade factor, but also due to political and diplomatic reasons. From China's side, perhaps the most important benefit was the prestige it received by having Lu Chu as a tribute state. Although Okinawans today are poor due to the ongoing US and Japanese oppression, historically Lu Chu was a wealthy nation, and it was highly respected by the other nations of the world, including by Europeans. Having Lu Chu as a tribute state was important for China, not in spite of the fact that Lu Chu maintained its sovereignty, but because it maintained its sovereignty. For a sovereign, wealthy, and respectable foreign nation like Lu Chu to freely, willingly, and eagerly pay tribute to China and acknowledge China as the greatest nation on earth, this was a huge sign of respect for China's rulers. This indicated both domestically to their own people as well as to other neighboring countries that they were in fact doing a good job. This in turn helped provide stability to China both in their domestic and international affairs. Whenever a new Chinese emperor took the throne, it was expected that Lu Chu and all of the other sovereign tribute states would send an ambassador to the Chinese court to formally recognize and congratulate the new ruler. If Lu Chu or the other tribute states failed to do so, this was considered an embarrassment for the new emperor and interpreted as a sign that they perhaps lacked the mandate of heaven and that they were not indeed the legitimate rulers of China. We see an example of this played out in the transition between the Ming and the Qing. The Qing captured the Chinese capital of Beijing in the year 1636 and established its rule over almost all of China in the year 1644. However, Lu Chu did not recognize the Qing until the year 1654, when they could finally be assured that the Qing were indeed the new legitimate rulers of China, and that their old friends the Ming, who had treated them so well for hundreds of years, had now lost the mandate of heaven. Not long after the start of formal China-Lu Chu relations, Lu Chuans began sending exchange students to China, where they would study Chinese history, culture, language, bureaucracy, and technology. Lu Chu also requested that China send settlers to Lu Chu in order to help teach Chinese ways. This resulted in the 36 Ming families who arrived in Lu Chu in the year 1393. Ming, of course, refers to modern Fujian province. They were given an area of land known as Kuninda in the native language, or in Japanese known as Kumemura. These Chinese settlers eventually intermarried with Lu Chuans. They and their descendants went on to play extremely important roles in Lu Chu society. Today, many of their descendants still proudly carry on their Lu Chuan Chinese heritage. In the year 1609, the Satsuma clan of Japan invaded Lu Chu and forced Lu Chuans to pay tribute to them. This event is often used today by both Westerners and by Japanese people to argue that Lu Chu had lost its sovereignty and became part of Japan. However, even the Japanese historical records point out that this is clearly not true, and that even the Japanese continued to see Lu Chu as a foreign country up until the 1870s. The Lu Chuan historian Mamoru Akamine points out that between 1609 and 1879, Lu Chuans deliberately increased their sinification in order to protect Lu Chu's sovereignty. Lu Chu internationally continued to be considered as a wealthy and respectable sovereign nation. During the 19th century, Lu Chu gained formal recognition by Western powers as an independent country via the signing of treaties with the United States, France, and the Netherlands. After the Meiji Restoration, Japan began its process of rapid industrialization and militarization. During the 1870s, Japan sent its new Western-style military to Lu Chu and began the process of forcefully annexing Lu Chu against the will of Lu Chuans. Lu Chuans sent diplomats to China to request China's help. Unfortunately, China at the time was also too weak, and it was experiencing many problems of its own and faced grave threats from Western powers. They did, however, attempt to negotiate on Luchu's behalf an agreement with Japan that would maintain Luchu's sovereignty. But neither China nor Luchu had any negotiating leverage at the time, and the negotiations fell through. Some Luchuans fled to China in exile, where they hoped and prayed for the day that China would once again become strong enough to help Luchu drive out the foreign invaders and restore its independence. Today, Chinese cultural influences can easily be seen throughout Luchu, in everything from architecture, food, clothing, music, dance, holidays, and much more. Many Luchuans today proudly point out that our culture is closer to China than it is to Japan. For all of these reasons, some Luchuans are even saying that we are Luchuan with Chinese characteristics, which is, of course, a play on the term socialism with Chinese characteristics. This is mostly said as a joke, but there is quite a bit of truth to it. China and Luchu have a history together of over 2,300 years, and despite sharing an ocean border, have never had any instances of violence or warfare in all that time. This is a remarkable achievement that should be celebrated and taught around the world as an example of peace, friendship, and mutual cooperation. Even the People's Republic of China in the 20th and 21st centuries has shown very strong support for Luchuan rights. Just recently at the United Nations, China helped co-sponsor a resolution known as the Legacies of Colonialism, which is being praised by Luchuans, Hawaiians, Chamorro, Native Americans, and many other peoples around the world who have experienced the negative impact of Western colonialism. So when the US and Japan claim today that they are building military bases in Okinawa in order to protect Okinawans from China, you can understand why the overwhelming majority of Okinawans do not believe that. I argue that although today most Luchuans do not have any Chinese blood or ancestry, that all Luchuans share Chinese heritage or characteristics. Luchu historically served as a center of international trade, finance, diplomacy, and cross-cultural exchange, and it can once again assume those roles in the 21st century. I'm Robert Kajiwara. Thank you for watching.